Providence, Rhode Island. Welcome to the Navigant Credit Union Broadcast Center, and thank our friends over at Deepwater Wind for all their help. We are here. He was missing last week. It's created a number of financial shortfalls for Go Local, not having the money man in the studio. Gary Sasse is back. The money man is back, and we're ready to talk about money, right?
Let's go.
Okay, so last week, Speaker of the House fulfilled his promise, or at least fulfilled a portion of his promise, and submitted legislation to cut the auto tax over functionally 6 years. What do you think? Is that a achievable piece of legislation? Is it good public policy, and how do we pay for it?
Well, I support cutting the car tax. We did it before, and we got up to $200 million going back to the cities and cutting people's car taxes, and the Great Recession came and we had to unravel and undo it. But people that are complaining about it lose sight of one very important fact. Rhode Island is a high tax state, and the reason Rhode Island is a high tax state is because of the property tax. If you look at property taxes per capita, we're about 56% above the national average. If you look at property taxes relative to the income the average person makes, we're about 52% above the national average. And so the legislature wants to do something to roll back property taxes. It hasn't got a lot of options.
Yeah.
If it wants to roll back property taxes, it has to eliminate a tax or restrict the ability of the cities to raise taxes.
Listen, no question about it. The auto tax might be, especially in the urban core, the most regressive, horrible tax going. You have people have cars that are worth $4,000 that are paying $1,000 a year in taxes.
Right. So it's the speakers come across with a legitimate policy choice. Now, what that means, you ask me whether we can afford it, the answer is yes, with a caveat. It means that we can assign a higher priority to cutting the tar tax, which means we don't have a dollar to do something else with.
Right.
And if times get bad, we may have to cut something else. But that is a policy choice. It's a political question. And if you think, like I do, that reducing high tax burdens is important, and if the cause of high tax burdens is the property tax, and the speakers come up with a reasonable proposal.
Well, it certainly seems like in the situation like the car tax, you cut the car tax $1, you put $1 into the economy. I mean, no two ways about it. That dollar's not going into 401ks. That's $1 going into buying some other things for lower income folks, or potentially for buying a new car for other folks.
Yeah, and I would ask the question, if you don't use $1 to cut the car tax, do you want to spend more on social service programs?
Right.
We're one of the highest spending states on social service programs. Do you want to hire more state employees? Those are the things the alternatives that we do with the dollars. And making the case to giving the middle class tax relief by cutting the car tax, I think, is a legitimate choice. People with different value systems may have a different view.
So, the Speaker's obviously going to pass this through the House. It differs significantly from the governor's proposal. The governor's been very adamant that insinuating that the Speaker's proposal is irresponsible. She's made videos saying that is not a responsible way and that we can't afford it and that we have more important priorities. Is there a showdown on this?
I don't think so, because I think the Speaker has overwhelming support in the legislature to do it. And if you look at the proposal, it really borrows some of the governor's ideas.
Yeah.
The governor's ideas, which was the right idea, I think, was to reduce the value of the car tax. She was going to go to 70%.
Yeah.
And she was going to do it in 1 year, and it was going to cost $60 million that 1 year.
Yeah.
The way the speakers phased in the program was cost $26 million that 1 year. So that's more of a balancing thing. But the same methodology. They were going to reduce the value from 100% of retail down to 70% of retail. The Speaker does that, and then he eliminates the tax after they reach that point. So the methodology is not inconsistent with the governor's methodology. And the question becomes, and this is a political choice. The political choice is, should we be spending more on free college? Should we be giving middle class people tax relief? We elect people to make those decisions. There's no right answers, no absolutes. So you can make a case for and against either. The thing that I keep on coming back on is we got about a $4 billion general fund budget. Over 6 years, the Speaker wants to take $200 million out of that budget to give people property tax relief. The figures I mentioned a few minutes ago indicate that property tax is an overburden. We get about, as a state, about 45% of local revenue comes from the property tax. National figures 30%.
Yeah.
Something is out of whack there.
Right. So the governor's got a revenue shortfall. She's got a car tax that's being implemented. What's the impact on her de facto pet? She was before the New York Times the other day on a panel being videotaped, making her case for her college debt reduction program. I'm not sure why it was at the New York Times. It doesn't seem to have a lot of implication on Rhode Islanders, but that's where she did it.
It could be the Playboy Club. She was there a couple weeks before
right,
that.
That's right. In Chicago, right?
Yeah,
with
that's right. Yeah.
Hefner.
No, well, first of all, it's pretty obvious, and the governor said this herself, that if she gets anything on free college, it'll have to be scaled back from what she originally proposed.
Right.
She also said she had reservations about calling it free because you and I know there's nothing free in this world, not even your lunch. So that'll be part of the negotiations. If she gets anything on that, it'll be a scaled back, program. But again, that will take money from something else because it's a choice. We have a finite amount of dollars, and I haven't heard anybody up there talk about increasing taxes. There are a couple of tax increases in the budget. The cigarette tax is being increased. Also, the sales tax is being applied to remote sellers, and those things together increase the tax increases of roughly about $40 million. So no one wants to increase taxes beyond that point, and so within the amount of resources we have, there will be some tough choices. The choices became a lot tougher when the most recent revenue figures came about. And one thing you can't ignore that I haven't mentioned, and I made a little bit light of the affordability question, is if you look out over the next several years, there's a projected deficit. The governor has said the projected out-year deficit was about $200 million 3 or 4 years out.
Yeah.
Well, based on the latest figures, it's going to be more than that. It's going to be higher than that when you factor in that the car tax cut first year is $26 million, next year it's $51 million,
right,
and eventually gets up to $220 million. So it'll put additional pressure on the budget, but I don't think that's all that bad because I don't remember state dollar, after you put the obligatory money into the rainy day fund, state spends everything it gets. So let's try to give the taxpayers a break.
Today we had a story, our lead story was of the implications of the shrinkage of retail. And mammoth numbers are rolling out about the number of major chains cutting their locations. Last week it was Payless Shoes functionally closing most of their stores. Radio Shack closing, all but 500. They once had 7,000 stores in the United States, and now they're down to 500 corporate-owned and I think 1,000. And this is globally. And the implications are significant. They're significant on real estate. They're significant on for states tax revenue. A dollar collected at brick and mortar is a lot easier than a dollar collected online. Well, is anybody thinking about this and what the implications are of it? We wrote it within the context of Providence Place Mall, but obviously it's most of Route 2 and...
That's a great question. Retailing will wash out, but the retailers that are strong, Garden City's strong.
Yeah,
They've got good leadership
absolutely
out there. They're attracting good stores. It's a good shopping experience. You can't say the same thing in the Providence Place Mall anymore. It's very different than we envisioned when it was put online as a high-end mall.
Yeah, right.
It's just a mall now. And so there'll always be retailing, but it'll be much more competitive, and guys that are good at this will stay in business. But the most ironic thing is I look at Commerce RI, and I look at the number of people that they're giving tax incentives to that are building hotels and building mixed-use facilities, and they're building more retail space. They're taking on money, building more retail space. So you ask the question, is anybody thinking about it?
Probably not.
Not if you know somebody, you want to make a deal, you die.
It was interesting. One of the comments up on social media was that a place like Providence Place could be transformed into a mixed use with residential and potentially with business located there. Certainly in 5 years from now, it is not going to be as we know it. And They're down to just two anchors now, one of them being Macy's. And clearly Macy's is a chain that has had mammoth cutbacks across the country. I think they've closed a few hundred stores as well. And you know, the word is that Nordstrom's has saturated New England, so you know, if they have a couple bad quarters, they could be at risk.
But Nordstrom's has a really, as I remember, goes back, you know, they got a pretty good deal.
They have a very good deal.
And it's not a Nordstrom's Class A store.
Yeah.
It's a smaller store.
Yeah.
It's a smaller store than that. So there may be some economic incentives, but you know, Macy's is a corporation. Everybody knows what their problems are. Yeah, it's going to change. You know, Amazon is now selling brick and mortar. They're building places. Retailing is in a state of flux, and we need to watch it very carefully. So what happens, you know, with the mall? Whether so far they've been making their sales tax nut, and that's been good. But that's going to change, and we need a commercial policy in the city or the state. You look around a place like Providence, it's not a commercial center anymore.
No. Boutique-wise, fairly strong, but other than that, fairly weak. The other big thing that happened while you were away gallivanting, I'm not sure which South Sea Island you were in or where you might have been, but was the latest proposal from the owners of the Pawtucket Red Sox. And a lot of pushback by, seems to be a fair number of circles. We had an editorial advocating that the deal should be, and the only deal that should be, is the state does the roads and the land, leases it to them, they build their stadium. And wanted to get your thoughts on their proposal and where we are today after 2 years and 3,000 lost lives of negotiating the pause on.
Well, it's September. Not going to be taken up this session, but it will be taken up in a special session in September, I think. There's two issues. You know, the first issue is the ideological issue. You know, should we be giving welfare, corporate welfare to wealthy people? And the answer is no. But when you look at the Poor Sox deal, and I'm a mixed opinion on that. The owners are putting in $45 million for the stadium. Of that $45 million, 12 is cash. So that's not a question. The other 33 is going to come from rents that they get and to make their part of the nut. The state's putting in $23 million, and if you look at the amount of money the state would get in sales taxes, and I'm not talking about, I don't cotton to all this expansion outside. I'm just talking about sales inside the stadium. I'm talking about payroll inside the stadium. Things that are direct to the ballpark. There's enough money that comes from those activities to make up the state's debt service. And then the city is putting in another $15 million, 10 for the site and 5 for the ballpark. And I'm not clear where they get their money from to make up that nut. So it's very close to a deal that we can see how it's being funded. One issue that they need to work on still, once you get past the ideological question, is what is the backstop? Because there'll be $33 million of bonds sold through the Providence Redevelopment Authority, which eventually, state Pawtucket, I'm sorry, back bonds. And if God forbid anything happens, the only backstop is the taxpayer.
Right.
So I would hope, if this deal stays on the table and it goes forward, that they develop a risk-sharing relationship, with the owners of the stadium. So if there is a default, or it gets close to a default, the total burden wouldn't be on the taxpayers, it would be shared. The other thing that people haven't spoken about when you try to understand this industry is it's a franchise in the International League. The International League, it's not the American or the National League, but it's been around for a long time. And so some things don't necessarily, a franchise can go bankrupt in the International League, but that doesn't mean it goes out of business. There's a backup there. And we have to look a lot closer at what that relationship is to provide some more security for the taxpayer.
Yeah, I think one thing that we unveiled, I think it was last week with a piece, was looking at all these stadium deals over the past 10 years, and hundreds of millions in taxpayer dollars has been spent up and down the internationally. Despite getting new stadiums in 2 of the cities, their attendance has actually decreased even after building $70 million stadiums. I think there is a market question as to whether or not minor league baseball has the fan base and will continue to have the fan base that supports it. We're going to take a break. I want to